Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a giant leap into, well, the architecture of life itself, community ecology.
It really is. It gets at the most fundamental question. Who lives where, and how do they all get along?
Or how they don't get along.
Exactly. I mean, think about this image. You have a huge, powerful moray eel in a reef. It could easily swallow the tiny cleaner wrasse that's hovering right next to its
I
face.
think so.
And yet the eel just opens its mouth wide, stays completely still, and lets that little fish swim inside to pick out parasites.
That one interaction says it all, doesn't it? The wrasse gets a meal, the eel gets basically a dental cleaning.
Right. It shows that these communities aren't just battlegrounds. They're built on these incredibly intricate, sometimes cooperative relationships.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission for you today is to quickly synthesize the core factors that determine the structure of any biological community.
And we're drawing exclusively from our source material here, chapter 54.
When ecologists talk about structure, they mean three things, right?
Yep. First, how many different species are there? Second, which specific species are they? And third, maybe most importantly, their relative abundance, how common or rare they are.
And that structure isn't random. The sources lay out four main influences.
The first is those immediate interactions between species. Then you've got certain pivotal species, like foundation builders. Third is disturbance things, like storms and fires.
And finally, the big picture stuff. Biogeographic factors like climate and just, how big an area is.
It sounds like a lot, but it all connects.
Let's start with the relationships then. Interspecific interactions. They're usually categorized by whether the outcome for each species is positive, which we'll call plus, negative, minus, or neutral, zero.
Right, so this gives us three big buckets. You've got competition, which is a minus-minus, then exploitation, a plus-minus.
And finally, positive interactions, where at least one species benefits. So that's plus plus or plus zero.
Let's start with competition, the mutual misery of minus-minus. This happens when two different species need the same limited resource.
And because it's limited, they both kind of suffer for it.
Exactly. Their survival or reproduction takes a hit.
This is where we get one of ecology's most basic principles. It comes from an experiment back in the 30s by G.F. Gause. He was working with two little ciliate species, Paramecium.
Right, Aurelia and Caudatum. And when he grew them in separate test tubes with plenty of food, they both did great. They flourished.
But then he put them together.
And that changed everything. In the same culture with that same limited food, P. caudatum always went extinct. Every single time.
Because Aurelia was just a slightly better competitor.
That's it. And this led Gause to the principle of competitive exclusion. If two species have identical ecological niches, they just cannot coexist permanently. One will eventually drive the other out.
So we have to define that term, the ecological niche. It's not just an organism's address.
No, it's whole job description.
Well,
All the biotic and abiotic resources it uses, the temperature it needs, the food it eats, where it nests, everything.
and this leads to a really big aha moment in the chapter. The difference between a fundamental niche and a realized niche.
Yes, the fundamental niche is the theoretical range. Everywhere a species could live if there were no competition.
The potential.
The potential. But the realized niche is where it actually lives, which is often much smaller because of competition.
The barnacle example from the Scottish coast is perfect for this. There's one species, Campbell, that can live pretty much anywhere on the rocks, from low tide all the way up to the high, dry zone.
That's its fundamental niche. Huge. But down in that lower zone, there's another barnacle, Balanus.
And Balanus is the better competitor down there.
For sure. It grows faster and literally pries Campbell off the rocks. So the realized niche for Campbell gets squeezed into just that upper, drier zone where Balanus can't survive. Competition literally shrinks its world.
But wait, if competitive exclusion is a hard rule, how do you get so many similar species coexisting, like all those different little birds eating insects in the same tree?
Great question. They coexist through resource partitioning. They basically differentiate their niches just enough to avoid stepping on each other's toes.
So they divide up the resources.
Exactly. Look at the anolis lizards in the Dominican Republic. 7 species, they all eat insects. But one species only hangs out on sunny fence posts. Another prefers shady branches way up high. A third sticks to the ground.
So they're not really competing for the same space at the same time.
Right. They've partitioned the habitat, which reduces the competition, allowing them to share the community.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's shift to exploitation, the plus-minus interactions. This is predation, herbivory, and parasitism.
And with predation, you see this incredible evolutionary arms race.
Absolutely. Predators evolve these amazing tools, heat-sensing pits and vipers, for example.
While prey, in response, evolved just incredible defenses. You've got the obvious mechanical ones like porcupine quills or chemical like a skunk spray.
But the visual deceptions are, for me, the most amazing part.
They're brilliant. You start with cryptic coloration, which is just camouflage, blending in. But if a prey animal is actually dangerous, it often does the complete opposite.
It advertises.
It advertises with aposematic coloration, bright warning colors. Think of a poisoned dart frog. It's screaming, "I'm toxic, do not eat me."
And that advertising then leads to mimicry. There are two types here.
First is Partition mimicry, which is basically a bluff. A totally harmless species, like a hawk moth larva, will mimic a dangerous one. In this case, it puffs up its head to look just like a deadly pet viper.
So a bird that's learned to avoid the viper will also avoid the harmless larva.
Exactly. Then you have Mallorean mimicry. This is shared advertising. Here, two or more species that are actually unpalatable, like a yellow jacket and a cuckoo bee, evolve to look like each other.
Why would they do that?
It's a strength in numbers thing. It reinforces the lesson for predators. A bird gets stunned by one. It learns to avoid the whole group of lookalikes. They share the cost of educating their predators.
Clever. Okay, what about plants? Herbivory is also plus-minus?
Right. And plants fight back, mostly with chemistry. They produce compounds like nicotine or tannins that are either toxic or just taste really bad.
And our last exploitative interaction is parasitism.
Which is huge. We have endoparasites inside the host, like tapeworms, and ectoparasites outside, like ticks.
The scale is what gets me. The source says at least a third of all species on Earth are parasites.
It's incredible. And they can manipulate their hosts in really spooky ways. There's a worm that makes its crustacean host leave cover and swim in the open, making it way more likely to be eaten by a bird.
Which is the worm's next host.
Which is the worm's next host. It's just wild.
That's a perfect example of how interconnected these systems are. Okay, let's switch gears completely. Positive interactions. Mutualism, which is plus, and commensalism plus 0.
With mutualism, both species benefit. There's not charity. There are costs involved. They just have to be outweighed by the benefits.
Like the acacia tree and the stinging ants?
A classic example. The tree gives the ants food and shelter in its hollow thorns. That's a cost in terms of resources.
So what does the tree get in return?
An army. The ants are fiercely protective. They attack any herbivore that tries to eat the tree. They clear away competing plants. They even remove fungal spores. It's a total win-win.
And then there's commensalism plus 0. One benefits the other. Doesn't seem to care.
Right. The classic example is the cattle egret and the buffalo. The buffalo walks, stirs up insects from the grass, and the egret gets an easy meal. The buffalo is generally unaffected.
All of these interactions come together to shape the community. Which brings us to diversity and trophic structure.
Exactly. When we talk about species diversity, we're looking at two things. Species richness, just the total number of different species.
And relative abundance, the proportion of each species.
And both are crucial. You could have two forests, both with 4 tree species, same richness. But a forest A is 25% of each.
And forest B is, say, 95% one dominant species, and then tiny numbers of the other 3.
Forest A is way more diverse. Ecologists use the Shannon Diversity Index, H, to put a number on that. The key takeaway for you is that diversity isn't just a count, it's about evenness.
And that evenness has real benefits.
Huge benefits. Higher diversity communities tend to have higher productivity, they're more stable against shocks like drought, and they're much more resistant to invasive species. There's just no room for newcomers to get a foothold.
Okay, now let's talk about how energy moves through these communities, the trophic structure.
This is all about who eats whom. You have your simple food chain energy moves from plants to herbivores to carnivores.
But it's never really that simple, is it? It's more like a food web.
Much more like a web. In the Antarctic food web, krill eat phytoplankton, sure, but they also eat other zooplankton. They're woven in at multiple levels.
And yet, these food chains are always really short, usually just 4 or 5 links. Why is that?
It's all about energy. The energetic hypothesis states that energy transfer between trophic levels is just incredibly inefficient.
Only about 10% makes it to the next level.
On average, yes. The other 90% is lost, mostly as metabolic heat. So if you start with 1,000 kilograms of plant matter, you can only support about 100 kilograms of herbivores.
And only 10 kilograms of carnivores that eat those herbivores.
Exactly. They tested this with artificial treehole communities. They reduced the amount of leaf litter, the energy base, and the food chains got shorter. It's a direct link.
This inefficiency means some species have a much bigger impact than others.
Right. We can group them into a few types. First are foundation species. These are the big, abundant ones that create the habitat itself. Think corals building a reef.
Then you have keystone species.
These guys are different. They're often not very abundant, but their role is crucial. Robert Payne's experiment with the sea star disaster is the iconic study.
Okay, so what happened when he took the sea star away?
The whole community collapsed. Species richness plummeted from 15 species down to just 5. The sea star's main prey was mussels, and mussels are incredible competitors for space. Without the sea star keeping them in check, the mussels just took over everything, crowding out all the other species. The keystone held the whole system together.
And the third type is ecosystem engineers.
Like beavers. They're not just living in the environment, they're fundamentally changing it by building dams and creating wetlands.
So what controls all of this? We have two models, bottom up and top down.
Bottom-up control says that the amount of nutrients at the bottom limits everything above it. More nutrients mean more plants, which means more herbivores, and so on up the chain.
And top down is the opposite.
Right. Top-down control says that predators control the community. They limit the herbivores, which allows the plants to flourish. They actually used this idea to clean up a lake in Finland.
How did they do that?
The lake had horrible algal blooms, so they removed the fish that ate zooplankton and added a top predator fish, the pike perch.
So more big fish ate the little fish.
Which meant more zooplankton were free to eat the algae. And it worked. The water cleared up. A perfect example of top-down control.
This constant push and pull means communities are almost never stable, which gets us to disturbance and succession.
The old idea of a stable climax community is pretty much gone. We now use a non-equilibrium model. We recognize that communities are always changing because of disturbances.
And this leads to the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. This one's really important. It says that moderate levels of disturbance actually lead to more diversity than high or low levels.
It seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you break it down.
So why is that middle ground the sweet spot?
Well, at high levels of disturbance, things are just too stressful. Only a few super tough species can survive. At low levels of disturbance, the best competitors take over and exclude everyone else, just like the mussels did.
But that intermediate level,
It keeps things mixed up. It opens up patches of habitat, giving less competitive species a chance to move in and thrive for a while. It creates this shifting mosaic.
and after a big disturbance, the community goes through ecological succession.
Right. If it starts on basically bare rock, like after a glacier retreats, that's primary succession. It's a slow process of building soil from scratch.
The Glacier Bay example is a classic. You get prokaryotes, then lichens and mosses, then a key stage with alder plants.
The alders are crucial because they have nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They rapidly enrich the soil, which then allows the big spruce and hemlock trees to come in later. Each stage paves the way for the next.
And if the disturbance leaves the soil intact, like after a forest fire?
That's secondary succession. It happens much, much faster because you already have a foundation to build on.
Now let's pull all the way back the biggest patterns. Biogeographic factors. The most obvious one is the latitudinal gradient.
Yes, species richness is off the charts in the tropics and then drops as you move toward the poles.
And why is that? Why the tropics?
Two main ideas. One is evolutionary history. The tropics are just older. They weren't scraped clean by glaciers, so they've had more time for speciation. The second is simply climate.
More sun, more rain.
Exactly. There's a measure called evapotranspiration, which combines heat and water availability, and it correlates almost perfectly with high species richness around the globe.
Another big pattern is the species area curve. Bigger areas have more species.
It makes sense. A larger area just has more different types of habitats and niches available.
This all culminates in the island equilibrium model from MacArthur and Wilson.
A really elegant idea. They said island diversity isn't static. It's a balance between two opposing forces. Immigration of new species arriving.
And extinction of species that are already there.
The model predicts that the highest diversity will be on islands that are large, because a bigger area means lower extinction rates, and close to the mainland, because that means higher immigration rates.
And they tested this.
They did. They fumigated tiny mangrove islands in the Florida Keys, wiping out all the arthropods. And just as the model predicted, the islands closer to the mainland were recolonized much faster and recovered their species richness. It was proof of the concept.
Finally, we get to a subtle but powerful force. Pathogens.
They can completely reshape a community, especially when they're introduced to a new area where the hosts have no resistance.
The American chestnut blight is the tragic example here in North America. A fungus came in and essentially wiped out one of the most important foundation species in the eastern forests.
And we see it today in the oceans. White band disease is killing off the key reef-building corals in the Caribbean. When those foundation species go, the whole three-dimensional structure of the reef collapses, and diversity just craters.
And now, of course, the big concern is zoonotic diseases pathogens that jump from animals to humans.
Often through a vector like a tick or a mosquito. This is where community ecology directly impacts public health. With Lyme disease, for instance, everyone focused on white-footed mice for years.
Right, they were thought to be the main host.
But a deeper look at the whole community showed that a couple of really common shrew species were actually responsible for infecting more than half the ticks.
So understanding the whole web is critical for controlling the disease.
It's essential, whether you're trying to manage Lyme disease or track the global spread of something like avian flu.
So let's recap this deep dive. The structure of any community, its biodiversity, is this complex product of everything.
It's competition, it's cooperation, it's the strict limits of energy flow, it's the outsized impact of keystone predators and foundation species.
And it's the constant churn from disturbance and succession, all playing out on a global stage set by geography and climate.
And what really stands out is that none of these factors work in isolation.
So let's leave our listeners with the final thought on that.
Okay, we saw that losing a keystone species like the sea star causes local diversity to crash. So think about this. If a warming climate causes the extinction of a key ecosystem engineer, say, we lose entire kelp forests because the water gets too warm, what are the cascading effects? Beyond just the food web, that might fundamentally change the physical structure of that habitat for every single species left behind.
A compelling question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly well informed.